Everyone, it is Wednesday, November 6th in the early morning hours here. You're listening to the Mo News podcast as we take in election results. I'm Moshe Mununu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news, watch all the coverage, cover all the races, so you don't have to. Jill, we have a new president. As we tape this at about 2 a.m. Eastern time, Donald Trump has pulled off one of the most incredible, if not the most incredible comeback in American political history, en route to potentially winning all the battleground states. And as we tape this, actually, we're waiting for him to address the crowd at Mar-a-Lago. But it looks like he will not only have been our 45th president, but he's about to be our 47th president.
Yeah, new president, same as the second to last president.
Jill, we've been covering this thing for 2 years. We've been talking about the 7 battleground states. As of this recording, he has won Pennsylvania. He has won Georgia. He has won North Carolina. That got him to 270. And he is leading, and I imagine they might be called in the early morning hours as we put this podcast together and put it out to you, in Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Arizona. He could pull off a sweep here of all the battleground states. And by the way, not by an insignificant margin. And Jill, as we record this, they just called Wisconsin for him as well. And he leads in the 3 other battleground states. Just a pretty remarkable thing. And you can see it on his face as he addressed supporters just after 2 a.m. at Mar-a-Lago in a speech that was basically ad-libbed. It didn't appear to be much of a planned speech there. He talks a bit about his, not I wouldn't say surprise, but his joy at the victory. He brought up his campaign managers. He thanked Dana White of Ultimate Fighting. He thanked his wife at one point, J.D. Vance, a whole variety of folks as he celebrated what appears to be here a pretty remarkable turn of events here. Take a listen to a bit of his speech. Jill, he spoke.
I want to thank you all very much. This is great. These are our friends. We have thousands of friends in this incredible movement. This was a movement like nobody's ever seen before. And frankly, this was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time. There's never been anything like this in this country, and maybe beyond. And now it's going to reach a new level of importance because we're going to help our country heal. We're going to help our country heal. We have a country that needs help, and it needs help very badly. We're going to fix our borders. We're going to fix everything about our country. And we made history for a reason tonight, and the reason is going to be just that. We overcame obstacles that nobody thought possible, and it is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy? But it's a political victory that our country has never seen before, nothing like this. I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th president. This will forever be remembered as the day the American people regained control of their country. The task before us will not be easy, but I will bring every ounce of energy, spirit, and fight that I have in my soul to the job that you've entrusted to me. This is a great job. There's no job like this. This is the most important job in the world. Just as I did in my first term, we had a great first term, a great first term. I will govern by a simple motto: promises made, promises kept. We're going to keep our promises. Nothing will stop me from keeping my word to you, the people. We will make America safe, strong, prosperous, powerful, and free again. And I'm asking every citizen all across our land to join me in this noble and righteous endeavor. That's what it is. It's time to put the divisions of the past 4 years behind us. It's time to unite. And we're going to try. We have to try. And it's going to happen. Success will bring us together.
Book of promises made, promises kept. And as it appears here that he might have a full Congress that will go Republican, he'll have a lot of opportunity to pursue, various points of his agenda that he's been promising regarding tariffs, taxes, foreign policy, judicial nominees, a whole variety of things. Again, last night, he didn't mention Kamala Harris. He didn't mention Democrats. He did say it's time for unity, use that word, which is something he's used in the past. But of course, it was a campaign marked by divisiveness, and certainly Trump, talked about, Democrats in very visceral terms, talked about her in very visceral terms. And so there's going to be a lot here that is going to make Democrats nervous, Republicans excited here. We didn't get much of a sense last night in his victory speech of what comes next. I imagine we will learn more in the coming days and weeks as the transition begins. And we start to get a sense of who will be part of his administration. And one thing we will be waiting on in the morning is what Kamala Harris's message is, as what appears here was her election strategy, campaign strategy, really fell apart.
So, Mo, she was really depending on that blue wall, as it's called, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. They're states that Trump won in 2016 and that Biden narrowly won in 2020. And Moshe, as we've been talking about for weeks now, this thing looked to be neck and neck, right? We didn't know which way it was going to go. We didn't know if we were going to actually have a result on election night or if it was going to be a week later, a couple of weeks later. And it's pretty decisive.
Yeah, basically just about 6-7 hours after polls close, he hit the 270 number. He could get into the 300s. That's what it looks like in terms of electoral votes here. We've been telling you, the polling has been super close, but what did we know? That typically in presidential elections, the polling is off by about 3.5%. And in 2016 and in 2020, it underestimated his strength. And it appears, again, this wasn't the margin of error, but that we knew that if it went up by 3.5 either direction, one of the two of them could sweep. And it appears, again, that pollsters had difficulty here calculating Trump's margins. And again, as you mentioned, it was very close in 2020. Biden won by about 11,000 votes in Georgia, similar margin in Arizona. Essentially, Trump was really about 50,000 votes away from winning re-election last go around, if you look at the key states. And this go around, it's more than 100,000 votes margin in Georgia, more than 100,000 votes in North Carolina, more than 100,000 votes in Pennsylvania, in Michigan right now, in Wisconsin right now. You've seen some reluctance by some of the mainstream media networks to call the states. We were following Decision Desk HQ, which was watching stuff and aggressively calling stuff, and they got everything right super early. And you could see pretty early on, by about 9 p.m., that this was going to be a good night for him. The question was, how good a night? Good enough to win? It appears so. Jill, there was a lot of exit poll data that came out tonight that tells a bit of the story.
Yeah, the one thing that we learned is that about 3/4 of Americans don't think we're headed in the right direction. They're angry and they feel like something is amiss. And Kamala Harris, while she's not the incumbent, as we described her on yesterday's podcast, she's the incumbent light.
Incumbent light or pseudo-incumbent. Yeah.
And she had been asked if there was anything that she would have changed, if there were any mistakes that were made, things that she would be doing differently from Joe Biden. And she didn't really have an answer for that. Her message seemed to be it was going to be a continuation of the Biden administration.
Yeah, that was an issue that Kamala Harris had. And, they call it Monday morning quarterbacking in football. This is more like Wednesday morning quarterbacking. This will last for a while for Democrats. What went wrong? Well, what didn't go wrong here? We talked about the exit poll data, that 3/4 of Americans thought the country was going on the wrong track. It is very hard to overcome that. We did lives last night on the Instagram account as we're doing live coverage. And I said, if that's why Democrats in July were like, Joe Biden, get out. America was not going to, given what we're seeing happen on Tuesday night, he probably would have been routed beyond that. Like Donald Trump would be close to 400 electoral votes. Minnesota was actually relatively close. Virginia was relatively close. Now she pulled it out, but not by margins that Joe Biden did in 2020. And just given the anger out there about the direction of the country, cost of living, the border, what went down in Afghanistan, instability worldwide, the feeling, generally speaking, is this is not a good environment to currently reside in the White House. And while she resides a couple miles away at the Naval Observatory as vice president, to your point, she did not differentiate herself from Joe Biden. Maybe she was trying to be polite. Maybe it's the fact that she inherited his campaign. But ultimately, that'll be one of the many reasons that people will cite as to, if you were trying to run as change, admit fault, admit there were issues, admit, I think, we've talked about this. The White House was slow to acknowledge inflation. The White House was slow to acknowledge the border crisis. The White House, failed spectacularly in Afghanistan, and they tried to pin blame on Trump on all those things, or she didn't really have good answers for them. And so I think there's going to be a lot of questions being asked about her strategy. Jill, among the exit poll data, she did win women, just not enough women to be elected. She, lost men by a significant margin. In particular, Jill, in the exit poll data, the move of Latino men and Black men to Donald Trump. Latino men, majority for Trump. Black men, still majority of them voted for Kamala Harris, but enough shifted, a few percentage points shifted to Donald Trump. She actually did the worst of any Democrat since 1960 when it comes to Black male voters.
And I think there's also going to be a lot of questions about how it all went down. Right after Joe Biden's disastrous debate and the pressure campaign.
Late June. Yeah.
And the pressure campaign for him to eventually step aside, there were Democrats that were saying, we need a process. We can't just sort of anoint the vice president to be the nominee. And maybe she is the best person, but we should have some type of process to figure that out. And that just wasn't what the Democratic Party wanted to do. And so they rallied behind Harris. And there's many things that you could point to for what went wrong, what went right. So she didn't have the full election cycle to really perhaps introduce herself to the American people. But in the time that she did have, I think were still questions about some of her policies. Axios described her as the, quote, no comment candidate because they were asking about specific policies related to a variety of different things. And the answer was always no comment.
Yeah, on a variety of issues. And then she was asked in the CNN town hall recently, what is the first thing she'll do as president? Didn't really have a great answer for that. When asked about 3/4 of Americans, why they think the country's going in the wrong direction, she said, because Trump is running for president. She didn't have great answers to certain things, and they may have made the difference here. Now, again, not a blowout here by Donald Trump by any stretch of the imagination. He's looking like he basically reversed what Biden did in 2020 here. But again, it's not coming down to 5,000 votes in any of these states. We're talking about 100,000 votes. A recount ain't even close in a number of these states. He doesn't even need half the states that he looks like he's going to win here among the battleground states. And, issues that Trump pounced on here on cost of living and the border really resonated with voters. He made this about the failures of the Biden-Harris administration. And we talked about his distractions in a sort of his grievances from 2020, et cetera, potentially being a distraction here, not being disciplined. But it appears that the voters didn't really care. There was a gut reaction for them here. And you're looking at, again, demographic groups, particularly working class folks, and a number of red areas got even redder, some blue areas got bluer, but he's able to pick off enough folks. And, in some cases, some people may have sat this one out, and we're going to drill into the demographic groups in the coming days here as we learn more details, because I think it's always premature 6 hours in to be like, it was them, it was this group, it was that. But I think generally speaking, it appears they were worried about Pennsylvania. Jill, we noted that she spent her entire last day in Pennsylvania, didn't go to any other state. Clearly, they saw data there that wasn't very good and thought that was going to be the key. But it appears she had problems in multiple states there, which is notable. And now the question will be, what the next 4 years bring? Now, something we haven't mentioned yet is Congress. And there's been some major developments there overnight.
So, Moshe, the Senate has gone Republican. They picked up seats in West Virginia and Ohio. And at this point, the House is still unclear, a little too close to call.
Right. So going into this, the Democrats had the majority in the Senate. The Republicans have had the House majority. So Republicans have flipped the Senate. The question now is just how big a majority will they have? Right now, it's looking like 51-49. But if they can flip seats right now, as I look at it, slim leads for Republicans in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Montana, in Nevada. They could have like 53, 54, maybe even 55 seats here. Again, as we record this just past 2 a.m. Eastern time, significant for a variety of reasons. One, you got to confirm your cabinet through the Senate, which means the more seats he gets here, he has some potentially controversial choices for cabinet secretaries. He has some wiggle room here in the Senate. He could appoint a Robert F. Kennedy, despite some Republicans maybe not going for him. So he could appoint folks that with a 51-seat majority or just a 50-50 split with a tiebreaker, he'd have difficulty with. That's one. Also, judicial nominees, judges. That's a big thing for the president. He appointed several hundred. He appointed 3 Supreme Court nominees in his first term, and has had his nominees during his term as the Democrats have controlled the Senate. And so that's significant. And as you mentioned, there's the U.S. House, the other part of Congress. The Republicans have had a very slim majority, a 4-seat majority there. Ultimately, there's a number of races that we're watching that are still very close, could go down to hundreds of votes, and ultimately, dozens of races still across the country. Given the margins, I don't think any of the networks want to call those races yet. And in talking to Republicans tonight, they still, are like, we might have a 1-seat majority, a 2-seat. Democrats say the same thing: 1 seat, 2 seat. That's going to be key here. If Republicans can maintain House control, they control the House, they control the Senate, and that will allow a President Trump to push through his agenda. Jill, you were covering some of those House races in New York last night.
That's right. For the most part, the Republicans that won in the red wave in 2022 did hang on to their seats. The race that I was following very closely in Nassau County was District 4, Congressman Anthony D'Esposito. His Democratic opponent, Laura Gillen, has declared victory. As of Tuesday evening, the Republicans were saying it was still too close to call, but it does appear that that seat will flip back to Democrats.
Yeah, and these are races across the country. Republicans are worried about, with the move among suburban women to the Democratic side, to Harris, at least in the early polls, that could doom them there. But ultimately, it appears like the Republicans might find a route to be able to maintain a House majority here. And back to the White House here and the lessons learned for Trump. There were already people preparing sort of what were the mistakes of Donald Trump in case he lost, right? Not embracing Nikki Haley, not even trying to appeal to Nikki Haley voters, going full on what Megyn Kelly called at one point the bro strategy. Elon Musk, RFK Jr., Joe Rogan, Dana White, UFC, Hulk Hogan ripping his shirt open at the RNC. Was that going to be enough? And some people thought, I don't know.
Even picking J.D. Vance as his vice president, who basically appeals to the very same group that Donald Trump appealed to, as opposed to picking a Nikki Haley. And if you didn't want to go Nikki Haley, a Doug Burgum, or somebody who was perhaps more moderate that could have widened the tent a bit. And it appears he didn't need to do that.
No. And, the big question we're going to have is, what does Trump 2 look like? It's a discussion we've had on the Mo News interview podcast with several guests. The concern among Democrats as they talked about, his fascistic tendencies, calling him a fascist, saying he'll have no guardrails this time. That's been the concern from Democrats and even some former Trump officials, right? There's some of the people who've been saying those things, his former chief of staff, John Kelly, et cetera. And that was part of the messaging Democrats had. And so the question will be, what does a Trump second term look like? Does he feel that he ran a certain campaign, he promised certain things, and now it appears he's on the verge of winning all the battleground states by a more significant margin than Biden won them in 2020. So does he view that as a mandate now that he has the Senate and potentially the House here? And so what become his priorities, because it doesn't appear that he's going to have a Congress to impede any various moves here. Then there's the courts, right? There's a 6-3 majority in the Supreme Court. And one of the lessons Trump learned from the first term is he didn't feel he had enough loyalists in there. He had people who were in his own administration impeding his agenda. So what does he go with? He's talked about the biggest deportation in American history. He's promised a major policy of tariffs. He wants to extend his tax cuts from 2017. It's looking like that's very likely to happen here. And so there are questions about the deficit and what will happen there. But again, voters aware of what he was promising appear that based on the exit polls, the cost of living, concerned about inflation, et cetera, have said, yeah, that is what they voted for. Now, obviously, the country is very split here. Jill, I don't have to tell you that, as I did Instagram Lives last night, distraught Democrats, genuinely concerned, having heard for now this entire campaign cycle that, Trump will end democracy as we know it. I mean, we've known about sort of the rhetoric there. Oprah Winfrey at Kamala Harris's last rally in Pennsylvania, in Philly, which now I think about the omens there, because the last rally for Hillary Clinton in 2016 was also a Pennsylvania rally with different musical artists, Bruce Springsteen. So the interesting parallels there between the Clinton campaign 2016 and Kamala Harris campaign 2020. Anyhow, Oprah at that rally said, you need to vote like you might never be able to vote ever again. This whole idea that there will never be another election in America, that this was the last election. And so, ultimately, to what extent, if at all, does Trump try to reach out to folks who have that, very visceral fear of what a second term might look like?
I also think as we continue the Monday morning or Wednesday morning quarterbacking,
yeah,
Kamala Harris was a historic candidate. If she had won, she would have been the first female Black South Asian president. And she really didn't play that up at all. And I think it was strategic. It was an attempt to learn the lessons of Hillary Clinton. They felt like that was a mistake for Clinton to push in 2016. Right. And that's just another question that I think analysts and strategists are going to be asking. Was that a mistake? Should she have tried to push that more? I don't know. I don't know if it would have made a difference at all.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of things being thrown out. I mean, as I was doing my last Instagram Live around 1 a.m. talking to folks about it, they're like, well, if she'd only picked Josh Shapiro as her VP, like, well, if the whole thing came down to Pennsylvania and she was only losing by 15,000 votes in Pennsylvania, sure, you could say that. I don't know that a Josh Shapiro pick would have converted 150,000 people in Georgia, 150,000 people in North Carolina, 200,000 people in Pennsylvania, 200,000 people in Michigan, and so on and so forth. So I think there'll be a lot of things people look at. Some people will be blaming Joe Biden and the Democratic Party for running for re-election, despite clearly not being able to run for re-election. The people who basically, you could say either misled or you could say worse, lied to the public about his state of mind and his ability to run for re-election. I mean, we've seen it. We've been covering it in the past couple of weeks. Like, just the comments that he's had, and did he have it? And so the fact that he pulled out in July. The debate was June. That was July 21st. She was a candidate for 109 days. He was a candidate for 2 years and had been president before. So did she ever have a shot? And, back to the thing we brought up earlier, like they didn't actually try a primary process. They didn't actually try to challenge her. She didn't do enough interviews. She had a very difficult time ad-libbing. She had very bad explanations for various weaknesses the campaign had. And she was being defended by people, including people in the media who were like, well, she doesn't have to do interviews. I was like, you're a journalist. How can you allow this sort of thing? They wanted to run on vibes. So I think there's going to be a lot there. And then, to give Trump credit here, clearly he identified issues that the American public, that resonated with the American public here. And they didn't feel spoken to, particularly men. The youth vote moved to him. which is interesting. Latino men moving to him. And, you see there's a map on the New York Times that we posted on Instagram, and it shows every county in America and which direction it went since the last election. And you just see hundreds of red arrows. I think it's more than 1,000 counties so far moved in his direction from 2020, post January 6th, post 2 impeachments, post 4 indictments. And then the question will be what they called lawfare, not warfare, but lawfare is what Republicans called it, right? The raid on Mar-a-Lago, the various cases, some with merit, some argue, admittedly, even that New York case, Democrats admit, probably without much merit. And so did Democrats fail in, again, pre-Kamala Harris being the candidate, in making him a victim, right? Because I remember hearing from folks in the Mo News community who said, I've never donated to him in my life, but I feel like this is ridiculous.
There were polls that started to show more favorability for Trump with the Manhattan case, as you mentioned.
That first New York case in spring 2023. That is the moment where he passes Ron DeSantis. Remember Ron DeSantis? Ran against Donald Trump. There was going to be a Republican primary. He was down and out. And people are like, this guy's never coming back. He's persona non grata. The New York Post and the Wall Street Journal, owned by Rupert Murdoch, basically mocked him. Ron DeSantis was becoming the candidate of Fox News. He was being disowned by his own. They referred to him as Florida Man in the New York Post. In the New York Post, a conservative tabloid. And so with that, again, as we look back here, we can continue to discuss this for days, and it's going to be assessed by historians, right? Because again, he's only the second president in history to pull off the win, lose, and then win again. He's been running for president for 10 years. Ultimately, there are 2 key points in the past 4 years. If you look at polling, it's the Afghan pullout, which is when Biden goes underwater for the first time. And since the Afghan failed pullout in August of 2021, Joe Biden has not been viewed as more favorable than unfavorable in 3 years. And then you have that point in spring 2023 when the first indictment goes down from New York, the Stormy Daniels indictment. Again, a stretch even by liberal legal analysts. Of course, he was convicted on that. And his kind of sentencing, weirdly enough, Jill, in 3 weeks, the president-elect will be sentenced in court. What will Judge Marchand do? We'll discuss it on a future podcast.
Not for tonight.
Not for tonight. But that was his comeback. And Republicans will tell you that. And all these Republicans ran against him. And he had this hard 40-45%. And Nikki Haley was never remotely competitive. They were too scared to go against him because of the amount of party that liked him. So all these Republicans were touchy-feely, I'm different from Trump. And they're like, we like the real thing. We like the real thing. We don't need pseudo-Trump, new Trump, female, whatever. And then he got to this general election and, ready to crush Joe Biden. Democrats pull a switcheroo, right, with Kamala Harris. They thought they could pull it off, and they couldn't.
Moshe, as we look ahead and try to figure out what comes next and what a second Trump term looks like, a couple of firsts here. He is going to be, as we just mentioned, the first convicted felon to serve as president. And also his vice president, J.D. Vance, will become one of the youngest vice presidents in U.S. history. Yeah,
though Donald Trump would say, sure, you impeached me twice. You indicted me 4 times. I take that as pride. That ultimately, the Democrats tried to, do all of that, and I was able to overcome that. And that's going to be one of the very interesting things here. Again, Jill, as we watch the days ahead, the weeks ahead, the months ahead, the years ahead here. He also, by the way, notably, will be the oldest president in American history. He's a year older than Biden was when Biden took the oath of office in January of 2021. Trump's a year older. He'll leave office as an 82-year-old. Biden's leaving office as an 81-year-old. And so that's another claim to fame here, is we've now elected the oldest president in American history after electing Biden as the oldest president in American history. And so that's something we'll certainly be monitoring as well. Republicans would say that the media didn't give Biden enough scrutiny. I'm sure they will give Trump a lot of scrutiny. All scrutiny is warranted. And that'll be a thing, too. How does he treat the media? What happens there with the coverage? What is that? Because we saw this as members of the media during the first Trump term. You saw a surge in subscriptions to the Washington Post, which adopted the motto in that first term: "Democracy dies in darkness." Right, and the surge in subscriptions to the Atlantic Monthly and the New York Times, etc. And so, what does the media environment look like moving forward? And the fact that Trump this go around, 8 years later, has found that he's got a different route through YouTubers and TikTokers and podcasters, etc. He has his own media environment. And so what does that look like? He's also created his own social media channel since he was last president, right? True Social. What does that look like? I mean, just so many questions about who's his staff, who are the advisors. And those are all questions we'll get answers to in the coming days. But there's going to be a lot of navel gazing on the part of Democrats. There's going to be a question among Republicans like, well, this wasn't a landslide, but he'll be like, well, I've achieved my vengeance here, and the American people have rewarded me, and I've told them exactly what I was going to do. So now I'm going to go ahead and do that. What is that going to look like? And ultimately, what lessons does he learn from his first term? And sort of the mistakes, et cetera, of the first term and the achievements of the first term in the second term.
And want to just quickly mention that as of about 2:30 a.m., looking at the Wall Street futures, the Dow futures up about 840 points or about 2%. The S&P 500 also up about 2%. The NASDAQ also up nearly 2%. Bitcoin as well surging to a new record high of 75,000. And Moshe, I was thinking about it 8 years ago, I guess tonight, I was basically at 2:30 in the morning heading into the New York Stock Exchange. This is when Trump beat Hillary Clinton. And at this point, the futures were doing the exact opposite, absolutely plunging, the stock market futures, with investors having priced in a Hillary Clinton win and all of a sudden realizing, oh my God, Donald Trump is going to be the president. And things quickly reversed, actually.
Yeah.
But just interesting how the markets are reacting to this.
Yeah, I mean, the markets like to be able to predict things. They didn't predict that because of the way the media had covered that. I think this go around, they had couched it. They saw what was happening in the betting markets. You could already see movement in recent weeks in the markets that they were sort of preparing for him, buying. You've seen certain stocks going up, certain stocks going down. You saw Bitcoin surge last night because he's promised to be the crypto president and embrace that world. By the way, speaking of which, as we think about all the factors here, this is great for TikTok. He's pro TikTok.
Yeah.
So the whole banning of TikTok ain't going to happen now. I mean, there's just so many things. What does this mean globally? What does this mean he says he's going to solve Ukraine-Russia in 24 hours. What does that mean? He's effectively, the story we covered earlier this week, that he's given Netanyahu a deadline of January to finish the war in Gaza, do what you need to do. What does that look like? We've talked about how Russia sort of wanted Trump. Iran wanted Kamala Harris. So, what are they thinking in Tehran right now? What is China thinking right now? How do they play this? China likes the chaos in America. So they feel like this will sort of do that. And what will be the reaction in America? I mean, remember 8 years ago, we saw the reaction on the streets, the protests, the women in the pink hats, the women's marches, the protests at the airport over the Muslim ban. I mean, it was that was quite a time, if you remember that, in January of 2017. What does it look like this go around? What's going to be the reaction of Americans having been through one of these, but just having been through a cycle where a number of Americans were told on a daily basis that Trump is going to bring about the end of democracy, the end of elections, the end of all of that. So what's going to be the reaction out there? There's so many questions as people wake up this morning.
And Moshe, we will spend the next 400 or so podcasts delving into those answers.
Jill, that's just 2 years of podcasts. We have about 800 more podcasts. The last 100 will be a look back at the second Trump term. But yeah.
The other thing I really quickly wanted to mention, totally unrelated, as we discussed, I spent the evening covering some local races for Newsday, sort of doing double duty. And a bunch of people messaged me asking, oh, so you're a Republican, because I was at the GOP headquarters. And so a few people then said, oh, so does that mean Moshe is a Democrat? I just want to set the record straight. I was just randomly assigned that. It has nothing to do with my own political beliefs.
Just FYI, as journalists, we're assigned to cover things. It has nothing to do with our own political affiliation. We cover Republicans, we cover Democrats, we cover Libertarians, we cover Vegetarians, we cover everybody.
All right, everyone, deep breaths. Have a wonderful Wednesday, and we'll see you on the Instagram account.